All right, we'll call to order the January 4th, 2023 Cottonwood Heights City Planning Commission meeting. Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Tonight, we have two items on our business agenda. But first, we will, does anyone need to disclose any ex parte communications or conflict of interest? None. I want to acknowledge we have Commissioner Ebler on Zoom. And then the rest of the commission is here in person. The first part of our business session tonight is general public comment. So this is a time for the public to provide 3 minutes of general public comment on any item that is not on the agenda tonight. So if you're here to speak on the Jonathan Higbee item or on the Dover Hill development, please hold your comment to when that item comes up on the agenda. So is anyone here for general public comment? And if you are, you can either fill out a comment card, that way we get your name accurate, or you're welcome to just approach the stand. So we'll open it up for general public comment. Sure. Just go ahead and state your name.
I'm Steve McIntosh. You'll see me again. I just want to tell you that I sent an email to the mayor after the last snowstorm, not the one we just got through, because I thought the plowing was so good. And after this one, I never got stuck. And I'm driving through the city all day long. And I saw on Nextdoor that they are up in arms over the lack of plowing in Sandy. So I think we need to pass that on to the Public Works Department, because they came down my street more than they ever did, getting rid of the salt and the ice. And I think they did a great job.
Thank you.
We will pass it along to the Public Works Director.
Any other general public comment? And is there anyone on Zoom that wants to comment? No. All right, then we'll go ahead and close the general public comment and move on to our business items. First item on the agenda is Project AHO 22007, a public hearing and possible action on a request from Jonathan Higbee for declaration of an existing use violation as a non-conforming use at 7128 South, 2985 East. So we'll first hear from staff on this item, and then we'll open it up to the applicant if they wish to speak. And then we will open it up for public hearing.
Thank you. So this application pertains to the property located at 7128 South, 2985 East. It is a request for the Planning Commission to declare an existing use or structure violation as a non-conforming use. The property is zoned R18, single family, low density residential, and staff's recommendation in accordance with the staff report is temporary approval. Again, the request is declaration of an existing use violation as a non-conforming use. 2 sheds exist on the property, which do not comply with current accessory structure setbacks. The applicant's request was for one of the structures to be deemed non-conforming. A little background, a notice of violation was issued by the city's code enforcement division on November 10th, 2022. The current application was made in response to that notice. The city ordinance for this particular kind of application is 19.88.140. And some of this is verbatim, some of this is summarized, but it's all in that ordinance. It states that whenever a land or structure is used in violation of this title, which is the zoning ordinance, the owner may file an application with the Planning Commission to have the use declared non-conforming. The commission may approve such an application only when the evidence establishes all of the following. 1, that the use exists on the property at the time the application is made and has been in continuous use violation for at least 5 years. 2, that no complaint has been made against the non-conform or the use or the structure for a period exceeding 5 years. And that continuation of the use will not have a detrimental effect on the health, safety, or welfare of persons or property in the vicinity. The commission may set conditions it deems necessary for the protection of adjacent properties or the public welfare, including provisions limiting the period of time the use may continue. And then finally, commission decisions on these matters may be appealed to the city's appeals hearing officer. Staff's analysis, the first shed is labeled here as the 2015 shed. This is the shed that received the notice of violation from the city's code enforcement division. Just going through the current ordinance in comparison to the condition of that shed. In terms of height, it's 8.5 feet tall. That complies with accessory structure standards. The minimum, or the maximum height is 14 feet for accessory structures. So this is well below that. It is located in the side yard, which does not comply with city ordinance standards. Code says that accessory buildings must be located in the rear yard and must be separated from the main structure by a minimum of 6 feet. So this is located in the side yard and is fewer than 6 feet from nearby structures. This is also 26 inches from the side property line, approximately 2 feet. 3 feet is the minimum in city ordinance. The notice of violation was issued in November of this previous year. There's a shed right behind that one, labeled here as the 2003 shed. It's 9 feet 4 inches in height. That still complies. It's located in the side yard. Again, it is not in the rear of the home. That does not comply with city ordinance. 25 inches from the side property line, which is less than the minimum 3 feet required. And again, fewer than 6 feet of separation from nearby structures. In the applicant's narrative, it was stated that this is a legal non-conforming structure as defined by state code. That definition is included in the staff report, but it essentially says that a non-conforming structure is one that was legally established at the time it was constructed and has continued to exist since that time. And no evidence has been provided that the shed was built legally in 2003. So again, based on the evidence provided to staff, we cannot confirm that this is a legal non-conforming structure. So staff's analysis of the 3 criteria. 1, the use exists on the property at the time of the application. Thank you. And has been in continuous violation of the ordinance for a period exceeding 5 years. Both of these structures meet that requirement. 2, no complaint has been made to the department concerning the violation for a period exceeding 5 consecutive years during which the violation existed. We have generally interpreted this to be accurate because the violation was initiated by code enforcement. My understanding is it was not based on a complaint. However, it could be interpreted to say that the notice of violation itself was a complaint. But staff's analysis, giving it as much benefit as we're comfortable is, no outside complaint was submitted, so this could be considered to comply. And then 3, continuation of the use will not have a detrimental effect on the health, safety, or welfare of persons or property in the vicinity. Standards for setbacks from property lines from main structures are at least partially derived from building code, fire separation standards, and other safety standards. Building codes are adopted at the state level. So, cities throughout Utah have similar requirements and standards. One being the fire separation standard and being closer than 5 feet to adjacent structures and property lines and no evidence that the structures are properly fire rated. That does present a potential concern or risk to public health, safety, or welfare. Beyond that, the city and the city staff always errs on the side of following the city code. There's established record of complaints received on accessory buildings in similar situations to this. And when a complaint is received, which is how code enforcement operates, it is required to be remedied in a way that's compliant with code. So staff is always going to err on the side of city code and inherently be uncomfortable with any process that grants a waiver or an exception of that, just because no complaint has been made over a period of 5 years. If there are any questions about the actual mechanics of code enforcement or code enforcement specific questions, we do have representatives from the police department here as well to address those for the commission. So staff's recommendation, in accordance with that ordinance, is temporary approval of both structures as non-conforming structures for a period not to exceed 6 months. And at the end of the temporary approval period, both structures must become compliant with the current codified accessory structure standards. There are a number of ways to do this. We're not saying it has to be done in any specific way. That can be relocation, removal, pursuing a different city ordinance process. But at the end of 6 months, we would recommend that those structures should comply with code. The findings for this recommendation, 19.88.140 permits the commission to add conditions and time limits to such requests. It also states that the commission may approve these requests. They do not have to, even if a request is found to meet the criteria. And again, staff finds that it's good practice to always follow the code as much as possible. The property has adequate yard space to accommodate relocated structures in a compliant manner. This was also the case in 2015 and could have been done properly when it was initially built. So there is a reasonable remedy there, given the time period to relocate those structures without having to lose them. Based on evidence submitted, again, neither structure complies with the ordinance that was in place at the time they were constructed. And additionally, no evidence was presented to demonstrate proper fire rating of either of those structures being closer than 5 feet to property lines. Therefore, if allowed to remain for the reasons I've described, the structures represent a potential risk to health, safety, or welfare of persons or property in the vicinity. I have model motions here for when you're ready to move to that point. Any questions of staff?
All right, is the applicant here? Your approach?
All right, 3 minutes.
No, you have longer if you
Oh.
need it.
Okay.
Just state your name and
It's Jonathan Higbee. So I'm the applicant for this section. I guess a few comments. First of all, with regard to how this matter came to be, even the staff admitted that normally these matters come to be due to complaints, not based on self-initiated officer actions, which is what happened in this case. So none of my neighbors complained about the sheds, and I did a rather canvas de facto of my neighbors, and I had several people say, well, we don't see a problem with your sheds. Next, a key point is it's my position that the code that I applied under allows the commission to allow my sheds to remain in place. The neighborhood I live in is basically the original neighborhood that's on that geographical level. There's widespread non-compliance in my neighborhood. Now, in my application and in the comments that I submitted after, I submitted over 40 properties documented, sheds with no setback on the sides of houses, sheds with a little setback on the sides of houses, garages with no setback on the sides of houses, carport roofs going to the property line, just one after the other after another. And then on my walk before here, I walked out of my house did like an hour walk, and I found 12 additional non-compliant structures. So if the staff is so concerned about mine, what about the other ones? Now, from my perspective, a temporary allowance would be a denial. That there's really no need to have this code section exist in the first place if all you're going to do is issue a temporary allowance. Really, I mean, this code section, from my perspective, based on the staff comments, is that the city is a bit unaccustomed to using this section to allow codes to remain. The staff talked about, rely on the code, rely on the code. Well, this is part of the code, but it is true that it seems like this part of the code tends to lean toward safety, health. That's fine. Now, in my application and comments, I noted how there's several problems that the city has, especially with regard to how this whole matter came to be in the first place. You can check out my comments at length. So additionally, before I submitted my application, I sent an email to the planning department director asking him or his staff to visit my home or to work with me on the application. I didn't receive a response to that communication. So in theory, I could have got their feedback, but they did not respond to that email. The 2003 shed, the evidence for it being built in 2003 comes from the county's website, the county tax portion, where it lists the structure. I included a screen clip of that in my original application. It's directly quoted from the assessor's website, where they show that the 2003 shed was, according to the county website, built in 2003. And therefore Utah Code 10-9A 103-43 should apply as for that shed as being a legal non-complying structure. Now, in my comments, I put several draft motions. The city staff did theirs, but I put some. One of them was, well, what if I apply flame retardant paint to the inside? Would that allow the sheds to remain? Another option I put was, well, okay, the staff said no evidence of safety inspection. Well, I didn't know that they required that, and they didn't even meet with me before to see if that was a requirement. So if the commission thinks that's a viable option to allow the sheds to remain, I'm willing to engage in that, but I need a little bit of time to do it. Not a huge amount, but more than a day. So I'd encourage you to check the model motions in my comments and, see if there's anything that you see would be a viable option. And then what about the 40 that I documented plus the 12 I found just casually walking? What about them? I mean, so there's new ground being broken here, and even the planning director admitted this. Normally things aren't bothered with unless someone complains, but now the city has a new modus operandi where it's just up to how the code officer is feeling on a given day. So it's kind of a new thing and may be problematic. So can the city identify how my sheds pose a greater risk than the 40 documented plus 12 I found tonight, sheds and other structures? Can the city identify how my sheds pose a greater risk than those other ones? Is the city going to inspect those other ones? Does the city plan to enforce setback requirements for the 40 documented property, non-conforming properties, plus the 12 I found tonight? The 2015 shed has essentially the same setback as the 2003 legacy shed. So I know the city code is the city code, but I've put allowances for the planning commission to comply with this section where, okay, I'm willing to have a safety inspection done to see if that could allow the 2015 shed to remain. It's my position that the 2003 shed is completely out of your scope, but if you want to temporarily leave it in scope from your perspective, I'd be willing to have a safety inspection for that too, while we finagle on that perhaps. So bottom line, I think you have the power to grant an allowance, allow my family to live in peace, like the 40 non-conforming people who are within about a 3-mile radius that I found, plus the 12 tonight. So a key part of this whole deal is being able to work from home and, noise and bothersome stuff. And now I just don't have a route to approach the city to help with that section of the code. But now I'm being hit with this section, a completely different section. So relocation of the 2015 shed is not feasible. It's just too big. It won't fit under the carport. It's not huge, but it's no way it's not going to fit. It's not like some little micro tough shed or something. So anyway, but that's the bottom line. I mean, I'm glad I have the opportunity. I'm glad we found this code. The planning department didn't surface this code section. It was my lawyer who found it and said, oh, guess what? The planning commission gets to have discretion. So I appreciate they have discretion, but my impression is hopefully you can find a way to have more discretion than what the staff is used to allowing. So anyway, hopefully I gave a good presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Higby.
All right.
Is there any general public comment on this item?
My name is Marshall Bruff. I live a few houses south of Jonathan on the same street. First of all, I want to confirm that there are no complaints arising from neighbors. There are no derogatory comments. There are no concerns that are voiced or evident among us. Our neighborhood is a carport dominant neighborhood. When Jonathan moved in 2015, it was logical for him to look at what had been done, and he simply occupied adjacent space. He has a family. This was a logical progression for him. He engaged a nephew who had construction experience, and the shed is well built. All of the discussion tonight has been on technical terms, which I understand needs to be a part of this discussion. But I do know that you're reasonable people, and in order to be reasonable, you have to look at the genesis of this complaint in order to appreciate why something was plucked out of the 40 or 52 violations in Jonathan's area and why he comes up as the tall tree to be dealt with. Jonathan does have a reason to have contacted animal control. Had to do with incessant barking of dogs in the street behind him. And the officer responded and said the complaint Jonathan alleged was after an extended afternoon evening period. Probably the occupant was not home, where it was just incessant barking. So animal control was invited to come and examine the situation. The response from the officer was that the code says neighbors must complain. It's not singular. I know enough about legal language and writing intent of directives to take issue with the fact that that the language implies that multiple neighbors must complain before he can act in terms of leveling a violation on the party who owns the dog. Jonathan said, we have a house full of neighbors who are affected by this. The officer came to have the violation or the citing paperwork signed by Jonathan. And then as he took that back with one hand, he delivered a citation for the non-conforming structure. I don't argue with the fact that employees, I'm out of time, don't argue with the fact that employees can be ordinance enforcers, but there's a retaliation element to this, and that's why his tree stands taller than the neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other people here to give public comment on this item?
Good evening. My name is Mark Russell and I live on Summer Hill Drive. I don't know this gentleman. I don't know his house, but in sitting in the audience, I guess I'm trying to say, if the Planning Commission is going to look and hold to these particular code and enforce it, then I would ask that they also enforce the code as it stands when we get to the next item on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Joseph Hobby. I've lived across from the Higbees since early 2020 when I bought a house. I actually have the probably most forefront view of their home, and they've been wonderful neighbors, contribute to the positive aspects of the neighborhood as well as Cottonwood Heights, in my opinion, and I hope I do as well. All of our homes were built between the 50s and 70s, and though they share similar designs, they all take on kind of individual characteristics and stuff. I've never thought twice about the sheds that they have at their house being any different than any of our other homes, because we have these specific kind of characteristics to our homes. We have a saying where I'm from originally in Georgia, maybe it's shared here in Utah, but it goes along the lines of barking up the wrong tree. It's my opinion that, there's case after case after case of several different ADUs and semi-truck trailers that are dropped in people's side yards that are not, being enforced, along with RVs, upwards of 3 RVs sometimes being parked in people's backyards that actually make Cottonwood Heights not look great, to be honest with you. And sheds that, maybe are grandfathered in, maybe they're not, but they're off the beaten path. I mean, to me, it seems like there's bigger fish to fry out there. Another Georgia saying for some of you. So I understand the delicate environment we live in. I work as a mountain guide in the area, and specific to fire hazards and, the need to separate structures from buildings. But if this is truly like a grandfathered shed, I think we have to take account to that. And I know that there's no complaint from the number one neighbor that would be affected by it. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to provide public comment? Steve?
So I don't know this man at all. I'm not going to get involved in what happened with it, but if this was a permitted shed and there's an issue with it, it's a zoning issue, and I suspect the issue should go to the zoning because a variance could be granted. You'd have to demonstrate a hardship. If it was not permitted, it's an illegal non-conforming, and there's another way to do that. I just don't think that it's a planning commission issue.
Thank you. Any other public comments? All right, do we have a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close public comment.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Any questions for staff or any other planning, or should we just open up commission discussion? Any thoughts?
I'd love to hear any details from the code enforcement side about if that's agreeable to the chair.
Yeah, Police Chief Russo, do you want to approach? And Dan, did you have a specific question?
I would just like to hear the perspective of how this happened.
Well, I've heard a lot of different accounts of what happened, but most of them are anecdotal and hearsay evidence. But what actually did happen was Mr. Igby called and complained about a barking dog issue within his neighborhood. Fair enough, except when the officer arrived, he did his due diligence and went to the other neighbors and asked if they had any problem with the dog, or they heard the dog, or there was a problem. That's where the multiple neighbor issue comes into play. None of the neighbors had any objections, said they didn't hear of any dogs barking or had no problems with it at all. The officer then went back to Mr. Higby and said, none of your neighbors are complaining, but if you want to pursue this matter, you can. You just have to sign as the complainant on the citation, which he did. But he later withdrew that complaint and asked us to dismiss the case against the dog owner who actually appeared in the Cottonwood Holiday Court, and the prosecutor dismissed the case. During that time or since then, I have had complaints from other neighbors who, government plays an interesting role. Sometimes our role is to take the place for people who may feel threatened or intimidated of retaliation or intimidation. And I have been contacted by people who do take issue with the shed and sheds. And no evidence has been presented to you that the first shed, we know, we're not arguing when it was built. Our argument was that when it was built, it was not legal at that time either. And no evidence has been supported or presented to you in contrast to that. And we, as to the argument of the other 40, whatever other non-conforming or illegal structures, great. But we deal with them, you are correct, as they come to our attention. And we deal with them one at a time to the best of our ability with the staff resources that we have. It is a slippery slope to open the door and say, well, we'll make an exception in this case and we can allow those sheds in the side yard. That's not what the concept of our community is about. That's not the character of those neighborhoods or neighborhoods in Cottonwood Heights. So the police department would urge you to, we have no problem with the 6-month extension. That's fair. And allow the gentleman to try to find a remedy or a different pathway to cure the violation. That is our position. Are there any questions or did I answer?
So was the complaint issued based on from neighbors complaining to you or based on the interaction that took place at the time of the dog complaint?
You're correct. The initial violation came when the officer went and was taking the complaint on the dog. He noticed the sheds and noticed that there were, I can't expect him to turn a blind eye once he's there on another matter and saw the violation. So he addressed that as well. There wasn't an initial complaint on the sheds, but I'm telling you that subsequent to that, we have had contact from other neighbors who, are not here tonight.
Thank you.
Any other concerns or questions? Okay,
Thank you.
am I dismissed?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. Any discussion?
So I wanted to kind of bring up some of the comments that the applicant had made and also the additional comments. And I would personally agree that there is an issue with these types of non-conforming homes within the neighborhoods of Cottonwood Heights. And I think, if he mentions 40, I'd imagine there's a lot more than 40 out there, and I'm going to be making those assumptions. And I think that there would be something that we would be wanting to look at to bring these to a conforming space, whether that is the removal of them to bring them into that conforming space and potentially set up an RDA or some type of a application process where if there is any type of city dollar that could be able to go towards something like this. But I think looking at this from the standpoint of one applicant, one non-conforming space, I think we want to look at this as the bigger picture. And that's more so of my perspective on this is there's a bigger issue here. And if there's a life safety issue with this home, there's going to be a life safety issue with many of those other homes that are going to have similar issues to this. And you drive the neighborhoods and you see a lot of this issue. And I know that we have a space that has been brought up in the past where we have these old brick homes. There's a lot of life safety concerns that I think we can have with a lot of these older homes. And also the precedent that's been set in these neighborhoods is who do you ask? And what is the education piece of, Mr. Higbee here? Who does he ask to go and figure out how to solve his problem of space or the problem of these 1950s, 1970s homes? And he took it into his own hands, and whether it be right or wrong. And in this circumstance, it could create a life safety issue. If there were a fire next door, a fire there, it looks like it's tied in as a permanent structure for the space. But for me, I think it's a much bigger issue than just Mr. Higbee's. I feel like it's something that's much larger that I think would be worthwhile. And I wouldn't personally feel comfortable giving him a 6-month period. And how many additional issues are going to continue coming up. And what, if this precedent is set at this point, if a neighbor has an issue, they're going to now come to code enforcement and find a way to, have potential retaliation. So I think we need to be proactive as a city and create a space for funding these unfortunate either construction projects that were either adopted or were done uneducated, process to this, but just to allow for that life safety space. That's my perspective on this. 6 months, there's a lot more applications that can be coming in on this and a lot more complaints that can be coming in on this. I think we want to nip this in the bud from more of a global aspect, and whether that be combining it with, the masonry issue that we have in the city for retrofits to, some of these other non-conforming uses that applicants could apply for. And I know that there's other cities that have set this precedent as well to create an RDA or to create a CRA around this. So that's my perspective.
Any other thoughts, or do we have a motion or more discussion?
Yeah, I think a little more discussion. I think many homes that are built of all these things, and I'm not sure what a CRA is. The idea of going to require about it. And so I like that idea. I mean, I think that very I that it's odd that just to have that. So I there's been a discussion about allowing private property owners use their properties as whether it was the riparian, all these public lot of nuance how are allowed. And setting a standard where anything that doesn't set high. So I just don't know if there's something in between. Setting up these types of funds that help citizens within our community pay for a real. That's not a plan. A lot of don't. I don't know if there's a middle ground. This one bill.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, but I would say that it's well outside the purview of the Planning Commission to initiate anything like that, and would need to be brought to the City Council. I think the issue that we have at hand is the application to either approve or deny the declaration of an existing use violation as a non-conforming use. And I will say, in the however many years I've been on this commission, most of the accusations against the commission are that we aren't enforcing the code enough, and we need to enforce it more, and we need to have more code enforcement in our city. And so this is the first time that I've been in the situation of having of saying that we aren't going to enforce the code, and I don't think that sets a good precedent. We have to have standards, and in this case, the Planning Commission is the body to enforce the code or to interpret and implement the code. So I think this is a tough situation, and I don't have the answer to the other 40 structures or the other 12, and but it's a difficult situation. I think that actually 6 months, if we're going to implement a time period, just having had to try to find a contractor recently, I would say that 6 months is not enough time to find a contractor and move or rebuild a shed. So I would recommend that be changed to a year. should we move forward with this recommendation.
And I'm in agreement with you, Chair, that this is a tough situation. Our focus is on this particular case. We can't do anything about the others that maybe are, well, not maybe, that are out there. I'd love to see some middle ground, but again, that's not the Planning Commission's role to be able to establish that. Maybe I believe this could go to appeals process after, and maybe during that appeals process, it goes then to the city council, who can then look at some kind of fund being set up. I'm not sure what that fund could do in a lot of these cases either, though, for the non-conforming. I mean, the codes are in place for a reason, and not having knowledge of the code, while frustrating, is not a reason for it to be okay. And that's hard. And we've probably all been through that, like speeding and didn't know the speed limit was 30 and whatever it might be. But that to me, that's not a reason for it to be okay. So this is tough. I understand that. And I agree that the time frame should be a year and not 6 months, if that's the route we're going to go.
I just want to add, first of all, I agree with what was said. I appreciate the comments that have been made. I think the first place to start is, what does this body have authority to do, and why? And what is our primary responsibility? And really, our primary responsibility is to interpret and enforce the code. We're not really good judges. We're not really good. We don't write the code in most cases anyway. And so our job is to take the code that exists and to apply it fairly. You mentioned speeding tickets. I can find hundreds of people speeding, but it doesn't get me out of my ticket. You know, if I get a ticket for speeding, I might complain about all kinds of enforcement problems that seem unequal. But if this body makes a decision to not enforce limits and to not hold that these limits matter, then we essentially rewrite the rules. We rewrite the ordinance by saying, if you disagree with it and it creates a hardship for you, then we'll change it around your situation. And I just don't think that that's this body's role. There are plenty of places where this issue can be addressed in a different way with judges and as was mentioned, with an appeals officer. But I think for me, the thing that my role holds me to do is to say that the city does plan to enforce setback limits, at least at this body's level, and that we won't be the final word in this case. We certainly won't be the final word, but our word will be, at least from me, that these rules matter, and we'll hold to them.
I appreciate the input from the applicant and also his neighbors, and that speaks a lot to a community and what we're seeking after in Cottonwood Heights. I also appreciate the code enforcement officers and what they're attempting to do. We're asking them to enforce rules that previously have not been enforced. But when do we start? You know, are we just going to say, well, we're just going to keep things the way that they were? Now, I know that we've got residents that miss 19 whatever and would like for us to stay in that. But to me, the realities are that we are not a rural community. We're barely a suburban community. And as we get closer to being some version of urban, we're close to each other. We're in close proximity. So our behavior and the structures, whether we put them there or someone else did, affect each other. And so it does mean that there are changes that need to be made. I'd add another analogy that if you buy a car that's 20 years old that had a bunch of modifications to it, it may not pass inspection, and that's a tough thing. And that emissions change, and that's a difficult thing. And I realize that. I feel really strongly that as a city, we need to make sure that we're communicating to people that are in this circumstance what the pathway forward is. And I'm not sure what the mechanism is, but if we really do want to see change, I think we need to be proactive about it. This feels like a gotcha a little bit, and that's not lost on me. But at the same time, we have the responsibility to the code, and so I would second the commissioners speaking to that we've got to draw the line. It's unfortunate the circumstances that bring us to this point, but I just speak in favor of enforcing the code.
All right, does anyone have a motion?
I move to issue temporary approval not to exceed 1 year from the date of approval of project AHO 22007, with the condition that both accessory structures be removed, relocated, or reconstructed in a manner that complies with the current city ordinance, based on the recommendations and findings of the staff report dated January 4th, 2023.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
I second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll roll call. I'll start with Commissioner Ebler on Zoom.
Aye.
Commissioner Steinman,
Aye.
Commissioner Mills,
Hi.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel, Commissioner Shelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Allen, yes. Right. That motion passes, and we move on to the second agenda item for tonight, which is project SUB 22005, a public hearing and possible action on a request from Ivory Homes for a preliminary plat approval of a planned unit development PUD consisting of 13 single-family lots and a public park at 3625 East Dover Hill Drive. We'll first hear from staff, and then we will hear from the applicant if they would like to speak, and then we'll open it up for public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a request from Ivory Homes for a 13-lot planned unit development at 3625 East Dover Hill Drive. Many in the room are likely very familiar with this project. It's been going on in various stages for quite a while. With the current application, the applicant remains Ivory Homes. This is a new project based from the last one that was considered by the commission. So a brand new application's been made. The request is plan unit development and preliminary plat approval. The owner of the property remains the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The city is been offered to purchase a portion of this property for the use as a public park, and then Ivory's been offered the rest of the property for low density residential development. The staff's recommendation is approval with conditions. Subject properties located off of Dover Hill Drive. The east side of the property borders on Wasatch Boulevard. Historically, it was a church meeting house building and a privately owned baseball field that was not public open space. It was owned by the church as well. Zoning of the property and much of the surrounding area is R18, which is residential single family. That's a low density residential designation. There is some multifamily very close to the subject property as well in the R28 zone, some twin homes located there. And then across Wasatch Boulevard, there's a public facility, which is the location of the Ferguson Park that's partially constructed right now. The current application submitted by Ivory Homes is for 13 lots, configured as shown on the screen here. The proposed city park parcel that would be purchased and owned by the city is located kind of right in the middle of the subject property. It preserves the existing pavilion today, and then the rest of it would be kind of where a lot of the meeting house structure actually is located today and some of the parking lot. There are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 homes on the east side of the park adjacent to Wasatch Boulevard. And then 4 homes on the west side of the park, 3 directly adjacent to Dover Hill Drive that would access on that road, and then 1 that would access on Summer Hill Drive. So access and traffic generated by this planned unit development would be a little bit dispersed depending on which lot is being accessed. The city park would be accessible. I'll show a plan in a minute, but there would be some potentially some parking located on Dover Hill Drive, but not on Summer Hill. Some background here as a refresher. Back in 2020, the city became aware that the church was considering this property for surplus after an arson occurred or fire damage occurred previous to that. Beginning at that time, the city met many times with church officials to express its clear interest in retaining, purchasing, preserving, et cetera, open space on the property that could then be used for a public park. So the city's intention from day one was we would like to preserve some open space on this property that the city can own. In a built-out city, it's very difficult to create new open space, and this was a unique opportunity to do so. In 2021, the property was listed for sale. The city was essentially directed to submit an offer, which was a little challenging to submit a competitive offer with for a park with private real estate developments, where the financing and return on investment works a little differently. But we did submit an offer for 3 acres. And this process had heavy involvement by the local neighborhood and church congregation as well. Ultimately, the church made the final decision to offer a maximum of approximately 2 acres. At the time, it was the eastern 2 acres to the city for a public park. And the remaining acreage was to be sold by Ivory Homes. And in this time frame, both parties put those properties under contract. The city then began working with Ivory Homes to maximize a park design. The eastern 2 acres had very limited frontage and very limited access. Didn't work great as a widely accessible public park, and we wanted to do something better. And all parties agreed that a collaborative approach to achieving that would be beneficial. So Ivory presented a planned unit development with 17 lots back in December of 2021. And I'll show that in a minute and talk about that a little bit more. But that planned unit development was approved with some conditions and modifications by the Planning Commission, but that did receive preliminary approval around that same time. Subsequently, in the process of getting from preliminary to final, Ivory Homes completed fault studies on the property and identified numerous fault hazards that made that previous layout unworkable and much of it unbuildable. So since that time, again, ongoing discussions have occurred between all parties and the owner as well, the church as well, to find an updated reasonable configuration that again provides an accessible and high quality city park and allows Ivory to construct what they were offered the property to construct, which is low density single family homes. So after a lot of discussion on that and back and forth and input by the city on what the city would be comfortable with and what maybe we wouldn't, a revised plan unit development concept was submitted, and that's what's in front of the commission tonight. That was a really nutshell summary of that. If you have questions, I'm happy to go into more detail when we're done here. So again, this is not being considered tonight. This was the 2021 submittal. This was a 17 lot planned unit development shown in yellow there with a private road system. The lots here, most of them were requesting reduced lot frontage, which is allowed by the PUD ordinance to request that. That is allowed by code. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute because I think there's some misconceptions based on the previous item. But part of the PUD process, they requested reduced lot frontage and reduced side setbacks on most of these lots. Most of the 17 lots were requesting modified setbacks. The commission approved this configuration, but without the modified setbacks. The fault study was done subsequently, and you can see the red and the purple there on the screen. is the location of the major fault lines. There were some more fault traces than are shown here, but they're within that purple area. So that purple is essentially unbuildable by habitable structures. And I will note one additional trench still needs to be dug. But it's right where the church meeting house structure is located, and that structure would need to be demolished before that trench can be dug. But that is an outstanding requirement of the city. They did dig, I will note, a trench farther up from that fault line and didn't discover anything there. So just one interim trench needs to be dug to figure out if that offshoot goes anywhere or not. So that brings us back to this, and you can see here the proposed city park parcel is pretty much in line with where the unbuildable area is. A city park it can be located on fault areas. It's just habitable structures that cannot. This is a concept, a preliminary park design concept that I think is important to show. This includes, this is an idea of what could go on the park, and this would be required to obtain final approval by the city council. That will be done subsequent to the platting process or the planning commission's portion of it via a development agreement with the city council. That'll go into final design and construction timing and deadlines and things like that. But this concept proposes some parking on Dover Hill Drive, pedestrian walking path around the area. It is intended to be a passive park. It's relatively small, so this isn't going to be a park that includes any sort of, fields for sports leagues or things like that. It's just a passive recreational park. What is interesting, though, is by preserving the existing pavilion down on the southeast side, there's been a proposal to create kind of a little activity area down there that includes a play set kind of tied in with that pavilion. So you have some different levels of the park. You've got your access and your walking path up on the west side, and that path circulates the entire park down to the pavilion, which could have tables and things like that, and a play field. So onto the actual request, the plan unit development details. The acreage of this property is 6.17 acres. The number of lots proposed is 13. That equates to a density of 2.11 units per acre. In the R18 zone, which is low density, a maximum density of 5.45 units per acre could be approved and constructed and continue to be considered low density. That equates to 33 lots. So this is far lower density than even the R18 zone permits. 2.11 units per acre is closer to some of our rural residential zones, our half-acre lots. That very low density range. The open space provided here is roughly 30% of the total site area. In the standard PUD process, open space does not have to be public. In this case, it is. It's a public park, and it exceeds the minimum open space required in a normal plan unit development. The PUD ordinance, the city code does allow it during the entitlement process before anything is constructed, the planning commission to establish modified standards for setbacks, lot constraints or lot dimensions, building heights, massing, architecture, things like that. This is allowed by code. It doesn't create a legal non-conforming situation. It doesn't create an illegal situation. It's just allowed by code. It's put in the approval and put on the plat, and then that project is governed by that set of standards that's approved. We've seen this happen in the Canyon Center development. The residential product there received reduced setbacks. The Giverny subdivision was a plan unit development that has modified lot sizes and setbacks. There's Newberry Grove. There's Royal Creek Cove, I believe it's called. So there's a number of these in the city, and that's what the plan unit development allows. It allows modifications to really for the benefit of either clustering development, preserving open space, preserving some environmental features and things like that. In this case, they are requesting much fewer modifications than the previous proposal, but all in an effort to provide the maximum park design for the city that's possible. So highlighted here are what are the lots affected by the requests for these modifications allowed by code. Lot 109 is the top right lot. That is adjacent to Wasatch Boulevard. The modification being requested there is a reduced setback on the Wasatch Boulevard side of the lot. All of the other setbacks comply with, what a standard R18 subdivision would be required. And then 10, 11, and 12, which are just below that top corner lot, they are requesting some modified setbacks as well, only side setbacks, not front or rear. And then slightly reduced lot widths. And I have a table in a minute that I'll show. The street itself, labeled as Street A and Street B, kind of that T-shaped axis. That's a private road that's being proposed. The PUD would cover that as well. They are requesting a modified pedestrian circulation system there. Rather than park strip and sidewalk on both sides of that kind of self-contained private road. They're working on a configuration that includes pedestrian access, maybe only on one side, which staff finds reasonable as well. So looking at the impact of these bulk and massing and setback exceptions requested, the impact of it is really very self-contained within the project. Staff provided early feedback at the concept level that lots 105, 6, 7, and 8 that are adjacent to the homes to the north should be standard lots, and Ivory, to their credit, took that feedback and implemented this solution here, where those lots now are all fully compliant with what would be allowed in the R18 zone as a permitted lot. This table here goes lot by lot and shows kind of the breakdown. I won't go through it all, but the lots that are requesting lot width reductions are doing so by no more than 5 feet. One is 67 feet instead of 70, which is the minimum required. And then 2 of them are 65. And those are the 3 lots at 111, 109, 110, and 111. So that's even 112, which is adjacent to an undeveloped parcel that has I found out a high transmission water line running through it. That lot is a full frontage lot. When we look at lot sizes, the minimum permitted is 8,000 square feet. None of the lots proposed are smaller even than 9,000 square feet, with some, touching on half an acre here. So from a lot size standpoint, all of the lots comply from a minimum size standpoint. A majority of the lots comply from when compared to an R18 standard subdivision to what you would see in lot widths and setbacks and building heights and things like that. No request has been made to modify building heights or any other standards. So only those things I've explained here are what's requested. Everything else just has to fully comply with other code provisions. We'll look at a grading profile of the site now. The top grading section there, A-A, is looking west to east across the site. This is really looking across the back of that site where there is adjacent residential development to the north of this property, where currently the activity field kind of dips down to that low-lying retention activity area. That grade change in substance is still being proposed to remain there. They're not proposing to fill that up and level the lots out with those to the north. They are proposing to retain that slope with a 2-tiered retaining wall system. And as I stated in the work session, the grading and the retaining and all of that needs to go through full city engineering review still. And that's always done between preliminary and final plat it's the burden on Ivory to demonstrate that meets code, and that's possible. So that's part of that review process. But just from a conceptual perspective, the grading there, you can see even a 2-story home constructed in the new development compared to a 1-story home adjacent to the north. The grading elevation difference does help with the visual impact of that. And again, those lots have fully compliant 20-foot rear yard setbacks, which matches what's allowed in typical R18 subdivisions. And then section B-B down at the bottom is looking from the south to the north. This provides us a good idea of the slope of the park area and then the grade change from Dover Hill Drive to the east of the site. You can see on Dover Hill Drive that finished grade sits almost a whole house, higher than than the lots on the very east side of the site. So there's quite a bit of grade change from west to east across this property. The park itself, which is this big middle section, slowly grades down from west to east. So you'd have your main play area up above, it would grade down. You'd have your pavilion and playground area. Lower than that, it would grade down again. And then you would have the homes developed there to the east. There is a full analysis of all of the PUD provisions provided in the staff report. I did not provide that in this presentation. But staff does find that this proposal does reasonably comply with all of those provisions. So staff is recommending approval of the planned unit development and the preliminary plat, subject to the following conditions. Again, this first one is very typical of any subdivision the city reviews. Between preliminary plat approval and final, all sensitive lands hazard reports need to be completed and approved by the city. A final plat and plan set reflecting all review comments and technical code requirements from any applicable city department must be submitted and approved. A traffic impact memo must be submitted. And then utility will serve letters and approved utility plans are required to be submitted as well. In accordance with the planned unit development ordinance, the Architecture Review Commission does need to look at this. They'll be doing that, I believe, later this month. And then we have requested trash collection, snow removal, and then maintenance and upkeep and parking and traffic plans for that private road. Per the PUD ordinance, we have requested a fencing plan as well. That's a condition of approval. And then again, that any significant modifications that result of the work done between preliminary plat and final in a modified subdivision plat layout have to come back through the Planning Commission. I do want to just reiterate again, we've worked very hard to respond to some of the initial concerns that were heard by the Planning Commission and by the public. We learned a lot when the fault study was done and feel that we've, as a city, have taken advantage as much as we can to use that area to create actually what's possibly the most functional kind of park layout or design that we've seen yet. Again, given the constraints that we were only offered a certain amount of this land and that more land was not an option for the city park. The traffic generation is split up. The density is very, very low here. It's all, high value, single family residential homes, which fits very well with the surrounding area. And there is a substantial grade change from north to south that's going to help buffer some of the impact there. On top of that, the requested modifications to setbacks are almost entirely self-contained and don't provide any direct impact to the adjacent existing built neighborhoods there. Any questions on this?
The right of way on Street A and Street B was noted as 25 feet. Has fire reviewed that? Typically, the right of way has to be 26.
26, yeah. So that's a technical requirement that they'll have to make.
Okay. And then if the adjacent vacant parcel to the south were to be acquired, would this have to come back in front of the Planning Commission?
Only if it were incorporated into this project in any way.
Okay.
But as I stated in the work session, my understanding is Ivory had contacted that property owner. This may have been years ago. The city has as well. There was no interest expressed in that property being included.
I don't have my own mic tonight, so we have to share. I was just gonna know, as a technical procedure for your question, if a plat were approved and then later on a property were to be annexed into that or brought into the plat in such a way that changed the plat's boundaries, it would come back to the Planning Commission as a plat amendment. So you'd see it then.
Okay. Other than the church trench, the trench that wasn't able to be completed because of the existing church, is the status of the geotechnical analysis mostly complete other than that, or is there further next?
The geologic hazard study is complete. So that's the fault study only. I'm sure there will be typical geotech, soil studies and things like that. They will look at that slope on the north side to determine if that's a sensitive feature or not. So there are other, we'll still go through the sensitive lands process, but the fault study component of it is to my understanding completed.
So
They may have additional requirements as they build each home to do foundation observations and things like that. But they did the scoping of the site to identify where those fault lines are.
So a geotechnical analysis of the soil content has not been completed as
Right.
part of that fault.
Right, it was just the geologic hazard study.
I have a follow-up question because I maybe I misunderstood. I thought they had to come back to finish the trenching after the demolition of the building.
Yes, so as I stated, they have to do the one, though there's one fault line that they found going into this large trench that they dug. The black lines represent where they dug trenches.
And so they're gonna try to.
They dug 2 or 3 more trenches up here and did not find where that fault continued. So they're gonna dig one in this area where the church building is right here. That was incorporated in the city's review that needs to be done at some point.
All right,
Yep.
that's what I thought I
Right, yeah,
understood. And
good clarification.
because there is a chance that there's one lot that's not buildable. I mean, and in
Correct.
that
It's-
instance. this
That would affect
development
lot
will come back
104.
Again.
My last question is regarding the construction of the park. As you mentioned, the developer is going to construct the park
Right.
with their means, resources. They're paying for it.
Yeah, that's part of the ongoing negotiation with the seller to on their side negotiate a price reduction that would allow them to develop the park.
Okay.
And the church, we haven't had the conversation of the actual dollars and cents, but the church is aware of that approach. And there's a request out to continue meeting with them.
Okay, so the details of how that works still needs to be worked out.
Correct.
Because I think it would be important for the city to put in place some sort of mechanism to guarantee the construction of that park is
Yep.
followed through with, you know.
And that would be part of the development agreement. There's a draft one that will go to city council, but that will include what the park looks like, exactly where it's located, and then timing of completion on that.
Great. Those are all the questions I had. Any other questions?
Yeah, just regarding the easements. So if I'm counting right, 4 lots, so 5 easements. Is that correct?
What do you mean by easements?
So or variations. So in your list, there's 4 lots and then one has 2 of its 4 sides that's affected, correct?
Yeah. So, okay. I see
So
what you're saying.
just one portion
So
of
for
9,
setback easements, 109, just the east side,
one side there, one side on 10, 2 on 11, and 1 on 12.
potentially 2 on 12, depending on where the house is.
And just for a frame of reference, for what we were looking at before with 17 lots, it was both sides on every single lot. So
If not everyone,
34
most of them, yeah.
34 sides, plus at least, if I remember correctly, there were a couple of fronts and backs.
Not front and back setbacks. A lot of those lots requested reduced width, though.
Okay,
And in this case, 3 lots are requesting reduced width. And one of them is 109, which is kind of access at a diagonal. So lot width on that one in general is kind of weird to measure. But then 10 and 11 are requesting a width that's 5 feet less than what would normally be allowed in an R1A subdivision.
okay, then one other clarification. You mentioned a sidewalk. Is there a way that we can be prescriptive about that being on the same side of the street as lots 1, 10, 11, 12, and on the side of the street of lots 105 to 109, as opposed to just wrapping it around 113, just for the sake of, this is my physical therapist side coming out, that we want this to be as accessible for as many people. We have enough streets in the city without sidewalks. We don't need to build anymore.
Yeah, I know they were working on that when we met with Ivory last. So when he gets up, he may be able to address that for you.
And additionally, when we're talking about the park, the slope for wheelchair accessibility and the width, I'd like that to be pretty prescriptive as well, that this is not I've seen a range of parks that Ivory has done, and I would love for this to be not a glorified retention pond, that this is on the higher scale of what Ivory is capable of, and they've done some fantastic stuff in this city. So I'm looking for their best work. So just to put that out there.
Any other questions for staff?
Can you clarify? You said that 112 potentially looks for a reduction in the setbacks on two sides. This document says just one.
Yeah, I may have meant, because the shape of that, the blue shown here is not all of 112. There's a little triangle that continues down to the south. So depending on where the home is, that south side may fully comply. Where that building footprint is shown here, the maximum buildable area, it does look like this southern side is requesting a 5-foot setback as well. So I may have missed that on the table.
Okay.
But the lot is just an odd shape there.
And just a quick comment regarding setbacks. A modification in setback width does not preclude them from having to follow the International Building Code in terms of construction, health and safety of a building next to a modified. It's different than the item we were seeing previously, where that structure was not built within the code.
Right.
The code requirements.
Right. The modifications are they're inherently part of a planned unit development in order to maximize open space or do other creative things or cluster development or whatever. So that's understood as being part of a planned unit development. It's authorized and allowed by code. It then becomes a legal use, not even a legal non-conforming use, let alone illegal. And then it has to be designed and engineered to fully meet any applicable codes.
Any other questions for staff? I invite the applicant to approach.
Thank you, Planning Commission. My name is Peter Gamvroulis, the applicant with Ivory Development. I really don't want to take up too much time. Mike did an excellent job explaining the situation and the history that's passed. Just like to remind everyone here, this is a 3-party effort that has been going on for about a year, that being the seller, Ivory, and the city. This property is a very different property than all 3 parties thought it was a year ago. And all 3 parties have had different intentions with the property. I think that we've worked together well collaboratively to see that each of the parties' intentions with this have been realized to the best extent possible given the constraints of the property. I just want to thank staff again, especially city management, city planning, and the city mayoral leadership. And I'm available, as well as my engineer is available through your digital platform in case questions come up. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any discussion before we open up public hearing? Okay, let's go ahead and open the public hearing. I do have one comment card from Mr. Steve McIntosh. Steve?
Okay, well, thank you for serving our community and allowing us to voice our comments and concerns. The current project is up for action tonight. I can safely say the entire neighborhood, as is the case in most neighborhoods, would prefer a more harmonious, better blended subdivision where we live. That being said, we realize the developer has rights as well as the neighborhood, and the city has needs as well. My issue is we had a 3-party meeting of all of this. Why didn't we ever include the neighbors and make it a 4-party thing? That would have been the right thing to do. The single most important issue in this project right now is access or the lack of it. There was essentially a prescriptive easement that was established for 7650 and Summerhill Drive and Avondale Drive through the church parking lot, because that's how everybody would go through. There's one means of egress in and out of Summerhill Drive and Avondale onto 3500 East. It concerned the UFA so much that they called me and they counted the number of houses in there and said, are you okay with 71 houses not having 2 means of egress? That's why I put that all in the comment that I did. So all you need to do is take 105, take 1,820 square feet out of it, extend the road out onto Dover Hill Drive. It'll probably take 2 parking spots away. And then you can sit there and have a second means of egress in the event of an emergency, because moving trucks, fire engines, they're not going to go in there. A fire engine won't even go into the T because they won't burn their engine up. So the, according to the submitted plans, a simple modification would do that. And that alleviates the bottleneck, provides better harmony, and maintains better circulation through the whole development as required by the PUD ordinance 19.78.010. Many residents I've spoken to, including Jim Peters, have said they would sure like a road through there. And Jim even said they should consider the drawing that I did. We applaud the efforts of the city, but the constituents of the city and the voters of the city are at an inherent disadvantage because we have to work and we don't get the communication and transparency because we have full-time careers as well. This access costs essentially nothing. So it's an easy thing to do. When I look at that lot plan too, lots 105 and lots 109, they have 25 feet of frontage. That's not 70 feet. When you look at that road, it's 12 and a half feet on both sides. So that's what it is. Once it's approved, it's hard to go back and modify it again.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else here to give public comment? Go ahead.
My name is Margarita Martin and I live on Dover Hill Drive, right across from the entrance of the park. My concern is, like you said, that Dover Hill will become the parking lot for the park. That means that my house, the front of my house, is the parking lot for the park. That means that if somebody from the park is parking there in front of my mailbox, nobody can deliver, they won't deliver that. If I have company, they will find any place to park except my driveway, assuming that nobody parks in front of my driveway, because that has become the parking lot for the park. I think that you guys should have to do something and not assume that the residents that has been there for 30 years are gonna become the parking lot for the park. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Martin.
There, I'm Tony Pines. I'm one of the residents that overlooks the park. We do feel Ivory Homes can do a development that can benefit the neighborhood and the property values. I want to bring a few points up. One is grading. The current grading on the plat right now has lines but no numbers, so we don't know what they're proposing. The prior PUD, I know you had them come back with actual grading maps on what they plan to do. The two two cross sections AA and BB are just single lines. They're illustrative, but they don't reflect the entire hillside and the entire property. Similarly, retaining walls. Retaining walls, again, are only referenced on the plan on those two cross sections. The prior plat actually showed multiple retaining walls, what they plan to do. And so that would be illustrative for us to understand what's going to be done. There's also in a special case, there's the stadium structure, which is actually, and I've measured it, it's a 15-foot retaining wall for the backyards of to the neighbors' backyards. It's 10 foot from them. And we've never heard on the prior or this one how they plan to remove that structure and replace it with something that's will continue to support the adjacent neighbors. So that basically acts as a retaining wall, a very massive one. There's even a tree there, which we've continued to water and treat for pests since Ivory Homes, not Ivory Homes, since the church kind of abandoned the maintenance of the property. Finally, is a quick question or suggestion on fill. The entire property has fill over it. There's a irrigation channel that runs through the ballpark, and at least on they never trenched the ballpark, but they found up to 11 foot of fill, and they want to put more fill on top of that. So I know this can be mitigated, but I'm just suggesting for safety of the new structures that there's proper soil compaction studies and mitigation, whatever that needs to be done in consideration about putting more fill on top of fill. So we don't want the situation like Hidden Canyon Estates right now that is having houses red tagged because of settlement problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pines. Any other public comment?
Hi, guys. I am Mrs. Pines. So I'm the worst at public speaking, you guys, but the mayor was nice enough to meet with us. And a month ago, Ivory Homes, which thank you for coming, we submitted 2 plans. And the mayor told us that Ivory Homes didn't care which plan, that it was probably the staff that wanted the plan that they put out tonight. And people in the neighborhood asked me to come and say that they prefer the other plan, which is a lower density. And it also was not a PUD, so they didn't have to worry about separate garbage and snow removal. And they just felt it fit better. Let's see. And the size of the park is minimal, so it doesn't really matter to them. And we feel that somehow the gazebo could be saved in either plan. Then, and it's a difference of in that little small neighborhood, which is at the back of a neighborhood, it seems there's a lot of townhouses, duplexes that all use that road. So Steve's right about maybe needing another access road, and the road could also serve as parking for the park. Then we have a couple concerns about the height of the homes. We've always been told on sensitive hills, excuse me, you guys, or on sensitive land that the height is 30 feet. And they keep saying sometimes it's 30 feet. So since we back up to it, it affects our health of where we are. And we're also really concerned about the stadium and the hill. We would try and encourage Ivory Homes to replace the stadium seating with the wonderful retaining walls that they do and not raise the grade and add more landfill. We're concerned about the stabilizing hill and the land sinking and all sorts of things going on. And I think that's all. We just want to say to Ivory Homes, we're your neighbors now, and we hope to have a win-win between the residents, Ivory Homes, and the city. And hopefully we can have your phone number and contact you if there's any problems. And thank everybody for being here.
Thank you, Mrs. Pines. Any other?
What happened to the first plan was that there were 2 plans.
State your name for the record.
Lucy Lever, I live on the north side of that. And there were 2 plans that came up originally. One had kind of like a conch shell shape, and that one is the key. Can anybody answer why we didn't choose that one?
I'm not sure what the other plan.
Well, there were 2 original plans before we came up with this one. There was this one and one other one.
The one before the fault study?
So it was like the fewer houses. It was instead of, well, this is 13, I think it was like 1 less house or something, or 2 less.
I can address that if you want me to. There were 2 concepts shown. One's a PUD, one's a standard subdivision. The PUD provides preservation of the pavilion, which has been a city council and mayor priority in this whole process. It provides more park space and ends up providing a better park design. There's a standard subdivision concept that did not get fully designed, but that would have been 10 lots and have a private cul-de-sac and really been entitled to approval. It would have had to come through planning commission, but it's not something the commission can add conditions to or really modify in any way if all the lots comply with code. The decision by city leadership in meetings was made to proceed with the planned unit development proposal. That was also brought to a commission work session, and the preference was for that PUD concept. So that's what was applied for, and that's what's in front of the commission.
So it's too late now, but that one had fewer houses, the park was a little bit smaller. The pavilion is a small structure about as big as from here, you to me. And the idea was that they were rejecting that plan because they needed a pavilion. But I think it did have fewer houses, less density, because the houses on the north side, you know, I've looked at all those things you just presented. I don't know how close the houses are gonna be. Like 20 feet between houses,
It varies.
it varies. So, I mean, that's what we're looking for, is fewer houses, less density, you know, as much open space as possible. I mean, it is really nice that they have a park there, but it's kind of disappointing for us that have lived there for 30 years and to have the church sell out and develop it, the whole thing is not what we all hoped would happen, but we have to deal with it. So we were just hoping for the less density, better. And it is true that the road up to this place that goes through Summerhill, most of those houses there are like duplexes, and there's cars parked all over the place on that road. And for access into this thing from Summerhill and Avondale is going to be a madhouse with so much congestion. So I know it's probably too late to consider their plan, but the fewer houses, the further apart would be the best thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hi, I'm Shelley Philgo, and I did submit a comment online, and I am on Dover Hill Drive. It seems to me that Dover Hill Drive, maybe Summerhill as well, the streets are very narrow. I don't think two cars can pass at one time. And so it would be interesting to see how wide that road is. So I don't think anybody's ever looked at that. But this winter, we've had a lot of snow, as you know. And there's so many cars parked on the road that the plow doesn't come through. And we can talk about emergency vehicles because they're not going to get through because the plows aren't even plowing your street. So we had several sheriffs come, I think it was New Year's Day, and they started knocking on doors and getting people to pull their cars and park them at Smith's. And that continues still to even be a problem. I mean, they were back there the next day. So all the driveways are pretty small. The street is really narrow. I think it would be worth looking at. There's way more traffic on 3500 East and Dover Hill. It's amazing. We lived away for 18 years. We just moved back, and I was really surprised to see the amount of traffic that's on that road and how narrow that street is. I walk around, I see the other streets, and they're way wider than our street. And I suspect Summerhill's the same way. It's just that old development. But I think it's worth taking a look at traffic patterns, at the street width, what kind of traffic you're going to have from, 13 more homes with 2 people or 4 people per home, and how that's all going to get navigated. And especially in the winter, and where are you going to put the snow? So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Scott Peters. I live on Avondale Drive. I am the chair of the Architectural Review Committee and am a landscape architect who has dedicated my career to community and park and recreation planning and design for the last 30 years. I thought I'd just share some of my thoughts. I first of all am very, very grateful for the city and Ivory and everyone working to try to come up with something that meets the needs of the community and will be a benefit to the neighborhood. regarding reducing the setbacks, any area that you're going to reduce setbacks, the lots 109, 110, 111, and 112 would be the locations to do that. I would recommend that rather than allow a reduction of 5 feet on both sides of adjacent lots, that you restrict it to 5 feet on one side and 10 on the other, so you have at least 15 feet between each house. The second thing that I would like to point out is the road that extends the T by lot 105. Whether you extend the road through and connect it to Dover Hill or just extend some kind of a pedestrian connection, a 10-foot connection, I think having that connection along or between lots 113 and 105 is really important for making that part of the new neighborhood, the new community accessible and walkable to the park. I also feel that it's important in the final design of the park to consider not only physical access, but also visual access to the park from Dover Hill Drive. And the way the park is currently designed, it eliminates visual access into that open space. And so I think there needs to be some refinement regarding that, as well as just some of the details and grading of the park itself. The other thing that I am somewhat frustrated about is the amount of park space that has been dedicated to retention. I know that in some of the earlier discussions, the idea was that they retain the water on the existing lots and not use the park. And I would encourage having them retain as much as possible within the existing lots and not push it into the park. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anyone online? Can you let them in or whatever? Is that John Porter? John, we can't hear you. John, we still can't hear you if you're talking. Anyone else in the audience while we give John a little bit more time with the audio? Only into the mic.
You know, you listen to all this and.
Mr. Chair, he's already shared his public comment. I would recommend that we don't allow multiple comments from the same people.
Okay, we should. Well, you can speak, but yeah, we should probably
I know, I just want to say.
keep the peace here.
That everybody, they're on board with this. They want this. They just want to make it work so that it's the best that it can be. That's all. You know,
Thanks, Steve.
I mean, we went through this last year, so.
Would you like to give a public comment? Okay. Anybody, anything from John yet? All right. Well, do we have a motion to close the public comment?
I move to close the public comment.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, any discussion?
I've got 3 questions for staff. What's the parking ratio for parks in Cottonwood Heights? Is there any requirement for parking ratio that's kind of a square footage to parking?
It's a good question. There may be best practices, but I don't believe there's a hard line requirement for it.
Okay. And then is there any, let's hear it.
I was just gonna note, we do have a parking requirement for the single family dwelling, which would be 2 off-street stalls per dwelling. But we don't have one outright for the parks. We would have to look into that with best practices.
So right now, from a best practice standpoint, does this plan seem to abide by, let's just say, either county best practice or city best practice? I know we haven't done too many parks other than the Ferguson Park.
Probably be a better question for the recreation service area and its director. Certainly the council can get into that when they consider the park design. I would guess, this is only a guess, that it has to do with the use of the park. If there's play fields, you're going to want more parking, obviously. This has always been envisioned as a passive park. An example, Golden Hills Park, which is larger than this, has 10 to 12 parking stalls only at it. So, and then Mount View Park has, 80 to 100 stalls. So it's all over the place, probably based on size, a little bit based on activity and usage.
Okay.
I'm gonna just add one more thing. I did look at ratios used on past projects, just pulled it up, and it's 4.2 stalls per 1 acre of park.
How many acres is this park?
1.87.
And as far as snow removal goes, I'm not sure if the applicant knows where snow removal is going to be placed. I know that many developments, including some of the other reference developments to this, had some snow removal issues. Where do we anticipate snow removal to go on this plat?
Well, we've asked them to provide a plan on that. Public streets, obviously, that will be taken care of by the city. On the private roads, they cannot put private snow on public streets. That's not allowed. So they have to come up with snow storage on their site, and that would be part of the final plat approval that's reviewed by the Public Works Department.
Okay. And as far as fire goes for this, what has the fire department said in regards to circulation and street circulation here? And does that hammerhead abide by fire's regulations?
Yeah, I believe it has to be 26 feet wide instead of 25. They have approved the concept plan though. They've reviewed this.
And that turnaround is
Yes,
sufficient?
yeah, the turnaround it's based on width, and then it has to have a certain distance from the center of the intersection to each, the end of each hammerhead there.
Was there any circulation issues in regards to adjacent neighborhoods that fire had any concern with?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Will the design of the park have to go in front of ARC?
We're going to send it to ARC, and then that will go on to City Council. Mm-hmm.
Chair, if I can also add, I think Commissioner Steinman brings up a good point on the parking. And I think where that park design is still kind of fluid with the ARC's anticipated purview if the application moves forward. The ARC does in its purview have parking as well. So that could be an opportune time to look at that as part of the park's design.
I'll jump in next, just for staff, the discussion about sidewalks, is that, will that be handled by ARC as well?
Within the park?
Both the connectivity, the comment that was made about the possibility of connecting lot 105 and somehow connecting that to the rest of the park proper. I know we were talking about fencing, but in the name of openness and connectivity, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's park design and park circulation. It would tie into that. So I think the buck would stop with the city council on that. Certainly you can make a recommendation. We can pass it along, but that could all be captured in that final park design and development agreement.
But I think if we included, I think if we included a passageway between Street B and Parcel A or the park, I think that would modify the lot of either 105 or 113 in order to make that public connection. Well, I guess it's a private street.
Private road, you would do it by easement, and we can certainly talk with Ivory about that, but. And it may be just something that could be used for access of those residents to the park, a gated access kind of situation, you know, that's an option as well. Because the park itself does, for public access, it gets down to that public road. I mean, that circulation will be there. So if you wanted an offshoot for the benefit of those residents, those future residents, you could do that. I think fairly easily without modifying the lots a whole lot.
I'm also wondering about the question regarding the water retention. I'm still concerned that because of the sloping issues, as you, with that diagram, just, we know that with parks just within, just like residential lots, we spend a lot of money to try to get flat. And just in terms of your thoughts on the retaining issue on the north side, and we're grateful for the residents that are involved. Is what a wonderful effort this neighborhood represents in Cottonwood Heights and your engagement. And obviously we can't do everything that you're hoping for, but I think I express gratitude to everybody involved that where we were landing compared to where we started is such a better place. And everyone's pivots, and I think in a good negotiation, everyone's not completely satisfied, but reasonably satisfied. But on the water retention and the slope.
Sure. You can see where the low points are, southeast corner. Everything will slope down to that point. We did have a meeting a week or so ago, a technical kind of engineering meeting about the city engineer's comments on that. The park can be used for retention. It's fairly common. In the concept plan, the slope of the retention areas was too steep. So they are working on that right now. There's some standards in place for, you know, where the city has to go in and mow those parks or maintain those that can only be a certain steepness. Basically, the direction given is retain as much as you can on the private area, and then any overflow discharge into the park has to be regulated. That flow needs to be regulated, and then, you know, we don't want just big pits that aren't usable as the park. But the city is comfortable using, you know, some of those park areas, if designed right, as overflow water storage.
One more question. What is feasibility of this project if 112, well, I guess 109 through 112 did not request any variances? Are they still able to build without those variances, just with much more limited square footage?
They would come in with the standard subdivision that cuts out about a 1/4 acre of park, loses the pavilion, and then replaces those lots with a cul-de-sac.
Okay.
So that's what would happen. I think they would come in with a revised proposal that the city has much less say over. We'd still get a park, but not as good of a park.
And that's what I thought. And I feel like Ivory has been doing a very reasonable job of abiding by the needs of the community. So thank you.
We have
Chair, it appears that we
Porter.
have a resident that showed up that was raising his hand. I know this is a breach of our normal protocol, but I would move to reopen the public comment for that one individual.
Okay, yeah, Mr. Porter.
So I'm John Porter. I live in the north side of the park. And what I really wanted to bring up was the parking on Dover Hill and the 4 lots by us and the sidewalk that's proposed in the thick. My house is the only house that has a side abutment to the park. So the path is like 3 feet away from the side of my house. The parking spots are like 3 feet from the side easement or the side setback of my house. I think there should be more room or reduce the number of parking spots. I'd actually prefer that the parking spots be down by the pavilion because that's where most people are going to park and they're going to come across. And then if you wanted to put a road, which somebody was talking about, the other house that Ivory's putting up has a 5 foot or 10 foot setback from the park rather than a full setback. So I would have a sidewalk closer on my side, which is what I've had for several years and had to deal with the dog walkers, the poopers, the skateboards, the electric bikes, the bagpipe practice, and all the things, just right next to my house. It was a fire lane. I didn't have cars parked. And at least I had some of that. So I would like to see a little bit more thought to that part of the park. I mean, Margarita mentioned the amount of parking. It's going to be bad. The park can be used for dogs. It'll be off leash. I'm sure we're going to have all the things that happen in those park across the way. That's what they used it for before. We had to listen to it. We're the closest to it. And so I would like to see something done to make it so that my house is treated like it's a street side setback to any sidewalk or road like it would be on all the other houses in the neighborhood that or but by the park. So the walking path would be like a sidewalk, and it should be as far away from my house as, you know, the sidewalk in front of my house, as far as the setback from the designated lot line. But I mean, those are my main comments, and you know, the other ones, you know, it is a better plan than, you know, it was, but I do want to figure out how to get less these people walking by. My neighbors have, you know, been, as far as we sit there and see all the things that have been going on in the previous LDS, you know, parking lot and stuff there that was far from respectful of the neighborhood. Anyway, that's my comment. So that was my wanted to mention.
Thank you. All right, continue the discussion.
I think we need to close public comment again, don't we?
I would move that we both close public comment.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
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 All right. Any other discussion?
I just want to point out that I appreciate the neighbors coming and sharing their thoughts and the work that clearly is you've put in as well and thinking about what's going to happen here. And I will point out a lot of the things that were brought up with concerns with traffic and the fire, et cetera, are addressed as, excuse me, as conditions that need to be addressed as part of that would be part of the approval, is that these things have to be addressed. So just rest assured that these are here as part of the conditions.
Let me just add a couple of thoughts. I think this is a really nice plan. It's well done. It's well thought out. It tries to accommodate a lot of different hopes, I guess, and I think it does it quite successfully. There are a couple of things, and maybe the biggest question before us is not so much about park design or other things, but it's really about how the rules will be applied to these lots. And I think for me, again, the major question is, should you allow for a reduction of the setbacks? That's one of the big questions for us, I guess. And I think if you look at the setbacks requested, I agree with the comment that was made earlier. You would make me a lot happier if we said that we only allowed 110, 111, and 112 to have adjusted setbacks to 5 feet on the north side. I think if we did that, we would increase the space between the homes. I suspect that 10 feet at a minimum is not a negative impact on health, safety, and welfare. But if you only allowed the north side to be impacted, then you would have 13 feet, I guess, would be what would be allowed between. And I think at a minimum, we shouldn't allow the reduction of a setback adjacent to any non-public property owner. And that would be the south side of that 112. I think the reduction of setbacks on the other lots impact new buyers that will see that and have an opportunity to respond to it before they buy. But the setback on the south side of 112 impacts an existing property owner, a private property owner. And so for me, that one is kind of out of bounds. The others I would like to see, if we went all to only the north, it impacts the building envelopes only modestly, I think. And that's what I would like to see.
Personally, I agree with your assessment on 112 next to the adjacent lot, but I am okay with the other setbacks as shown or as proposed. My issue with the setbacks on the previous application was its impact to the adjacent neighborhood and context, and having that different character that the tighter setbacks provides. In this plan, the only setbacks that are tighter are not directly adjacent to the neighborhood context. And so it seems okay in my opinion.
And also to be clear, we're within the guidelines of the, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here. We're within guidelines of the code by saying, because it's a PUD, we are within the guardrails of code of being able to say that this is okay to approve the setback as designed in this plan.
Yes, so what it says is the normal massing requirements for minimum setbacks, offset, lot size, lot area per structure, maximum height, and lot coverage may vary from the underlying zoning regulations as authorized by the Planning Commission to foster a creative approach to the use of the land and the related physical development. The Planning Commission is required to approve any variation from the normal bulk and massing standards of the R18 zone. Staff's analysis there obviously is it's for the benefit of added park space.
Any other comments or questions about setbacks specifically?
So just some clarification on that, Mike. So the setbacks for 9 through 12 give benefit for additional park space. Is that what I heard?
Allows them to, yeah, basically, we know what the concept is if the setback reduction is not granted and it's a couple fewer lots and a quarter acre less park space and no pavilion. So the benefit of the modified setbacks is and also the modified hammerhead private roadway is that allows a little bit of clustering, which the PUD is a tool for clustering to open up more space in that central park area.
I'd love to ask the applicant if that's really the case here. You're talking about 9 feet of width. And to give up, for example, 9 feet of width, they would abandon the entire plan and go a different direction.
I think you should ask him. That's what he told me.
Chair, can we clarify that?
Would you please approach?
Thank you, Commission. So, and so speaking to your particular question about 9 feet, I don't know that. What Mike is referencing is we are obviously looking at this from a financial perspective, and that takes into account what types of homes and what size of homes we can build. There is a point that would occur where it does not make it worth us pursuing a PUD. The PUD is part of a negotiation to come to a larger or a different or more preferable open space. That open space is not necessarily more preferable to us if certain conditions don't occur. The few that we've asked for right here, we've tried to limit the impact, but every time we do a PUD, it's because we are seeking some sort of variance to the regular code to come to a different outcome. This is the same case here, right? So we've tried to reduce it. You saw our first stab at this, and we had it on every single lot, which is not an uncommon thing for us to do in a PUD, but in this case it was rejected. We've tried to reduce our ask, try to come to the same outcome, given that the property has changed quite a bit. But it is simple as, I can't tell you that I would say, no, we're going to revert to the old plan right now. Off that, I'd have to look at that, but that's very likely the case that we're not getting enough in the negotiation to pursue this any longer. I hope that made any sense. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
So with respect to the setback on 112, I think from a fundamental concept, I mean, that was one of the big issues that I had with the Dover Hill, the original plan as well, was we've got neighbors across the street where the houses are just crammed in, right? They get up the shoehorn. By comparison to the lots across the street. In this instance, all of these setback variations are contained within the development. as you know, we've talked about, it's allowed by code. And 112 does, you know, hit a private property owner, but as by all accounts, this property owner has chosen not to be a part of this exercise. And I, you know, as I look at something, you know, practically from an engineer, you know, the way we build, it would be absolutely surprising for somebody to choose a home of that structure because it's not efficient in it, and it would be, right, not to say that they couldn't. However, you know, it's more likely that there's some sort of L-shaped home, something like that. I would say in this instance, that south side setback for 112, I don't think that should be a deal breaker. Just for the very
Excuse
fact.
me, sorry. If you could hold your comment, I can't hear. Sorry.
Just for the very fact that that particular landowner has chosen not to participate in the public venue. So, you know, I like the spacious setbacks, but again, we've talked about what the city is getting in return is a little bit more green space. I feel like there's a lot that we are gaining as this plan has evolved. And I would hate to, you know, that just doesn't seem like something to hold up the process in this instance. I think that's right.
Any other comments or questions about setbacks? And isolate the topics.
This is such a dramatic improvement to me, and I know the residents would like to see more, but I'm very grateful for Ivory's willingness to negotiate. My comment earlier about pointing out where we were at in terms of how many lots and how many setbacks, this is like a 25% decrease in the number of total lots in that development. That's Herculean in terms of the developer taking one for the team compared to taking their ball and going home and just building whatever they want. So I'm very grateful to have a park and a park that I think will be primarily beneficial to the people that live all around it. And frankly, because of its tucked back nature and the decreased access, the fact that Dover Hill is a narrow road, if that were twice as wide, you'd have way more people going in there. This is going to be a hidden little secret in the middle of your neighborhood. I'm a little envious. I like this park. I'd love to have this park close to where I live. So I'm grateful for everybody that's involved in this, especially staff. Thank you.
Agreed. Regarding the park, Mike, can you remind me or us what the process is for the actual park design and the timing of that and what still needs to occur? Because my understanding is this is just an idea.
This is a concept. This is based on some preliminary input and feedback and ideas and basic functionality of a park. So it may be close to this. This isn't final. That comes ultimately from the city council with a development agreement. It will also go to the city's architecture commission to get their input and feedback as it goes on to city council.
So things like location of parking, amount of parking, grading, planting, sidewalks, all of that will be determined during that design process with city council and ARC.
Yes, and the additional factor of whatever it costs to do this needs to be worked into the rest of the negotiation with the seller of the property and agreed upon there. So there's a little bit of process left on the park design, but this is the idea. And whatever it ends up with, I think you're going to see these general concepts of circulation and usable space and, you know, activity areas. I think that's a given. It's just the actual details are still being ironed out.
And you know, I think we've heard some lovely ideas about just minor ways that this park space might be improved. I just want to confirm that there will be a public comment process as a part of that park design.
Yeah, I believe the city council will hold public comment on this. They would have to approve the development agreement in a business meeting. So there would be opportunity there.
I'll just note the Architectural Review Commission meetings are just public meetings. They're not public hearings. So for ARC, public attendance is encouraged and welcomed. It's just not a public hearing body. So if folks want to give public comment, if this application moves toward city council, would be more appropriate. You can always send public comments though to staff and we will get them to where they need to go.
Any other questions or comments regarding the park?
Will that be applicable for retention as well? I know there was some concerns on retention. Is that a part of ARC?
No, that's technical. That's between preliminary and final plat. That's engineering level detail.
Okay.
Now, I should say, I guess that does factor a little bit into the design of the park. So the city council will look at that. They'll be aware of what is there, but the first stop is it has to meet the city's code for stormwater retention. And that's the feedback they've been given now and are working on.
Any other questions, comments? We have a motion.
Do we need to read it with all the details, the recommendation, in our report,
I think we can reference the staff report with the state for those findings.
That's correct. If you want to include the conditions we included in your report, you can do that through reference without reading them, since the report is part of the public record. If you have any additional conditions, we just ask that you add those to the record since they are not in the report.
Who's going to make the motion without any conditions unless somebody feels the need to? Yeah, I move to approve project SUB -22-005 with the recommended conditions and findings published in the January 4, 2023 staff report.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Any amendments to motion? Hearing none, then we'll call roll call on this. Start with Commissioner Ebler,
Aye.
Commissioner Steinman,
Aye.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapel,
Yes.
Commissioner Shelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Allen, yes. Motion passes. Thank you, everyone, for your participation tonight and attendance. The last item is the consent agenda, I believe. Approval of the Planning Commission minutes from December 7th, 2022. Any
I move
discussion?
I move that we approve the planning commission meeting minutes from December 7th, 2022.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.